One thing that I've noticed that I often begin my classes with, and I don't know if this is specific to India, but I think it actually exists world over, is how much we are bound to the idea that this one thing has caused a mental health concern, right? And we can think about it like as if like there's an appeal to like a single factor, that this happened in that person's life, and that's why they're feeling sort of depressed. And actually, what the research tells us is that it's never just one factor. That we have to look at sort of almost like different layers. We need to look at at the very sort of root level, maybe what's happening at the neural level or the biological level, but then we need to kind of move on from that also see what's happening in the person's sense of self, what's happening in terms of their interaction with their immediate sort of environment. And now, in fact, in psychological research and mental health, there's a lot of emphasis on even looking at systemic factors, right? Like, what does it mean to be identifying with a certain gender? What does it mean to be identifying with like a certain social class? How are these factors also contributing to mental health and well-being? Measurements. So I know that you said we have measurements to rely on in terms of physical symptoms, but in terms of psychological symptoms or mental health or well-being symptoms, it's interesting to think about why do we need this information. So if I am looking at sort of measuring well-being in like a student body, what is my goal? Is my goal to just sort of see how students are doing in terms of academics and how that's related to aspects of their well-being? Is my goal in like the pandemic, and I know this is sort of a personal goal of mine, and maybe for some of you here you might relate to this as well. I've been really interested in understanding how are students experiencing the pandemic and how do they think it's impacting their well-being and mental health, right? So maybe there are new factors here that we don't have research on, that we've not conducted research on so far, because it's something that is such a sort of unusual and novel kind of circumstance. So maybe in those cases, I tailor my measurement to really include the student's perspective, the student's sort of subjective experience. Maybe I tailor my methods. Instead of using more quantitative methods, I look at qualitative methods, do interviews, things like that. So basically, in several sort of ways to measure both mental health as well as well-being, and mental illness as well as well-being. Each child is sort of different in terms of their needs and responses to stress. So we can run the risk of generalizing too much if there's just like a one sort of sheet of like, oh, these are the signs and symptoms to watch for. That's sort of my perspective. But I think what we can sort of notice more generally is, are we noticing some major shifts in behavior? So I find as a psychologist that always helps me trying to try and figure out what's happening with the person, and including sort of children and students. So for example, if I know that my child or a student has been really kind of engaged and interested and social, and then I suddenly sort of find that there's this particular sort of student feels very withdrawn, right? And I notice this shift. I think that is sort of more the key here, like especially as right. So there's one thing to sort of create that space that promotes some sense of safety, promotes sort of validation of experiences, offers reassurances. But there's another piece here which is more concerning, which of course again a lot of us have heard about, is in terms of students at risk, students who are engaging in really harmful behaviors. Then we really also have to have some kind of protocol or policies in place to see what we can do to help the student get connected with additional support. If institutions can set up some policies or programs or outreach efforts that allow students to engage with some of these sort of concerns, that can be really valuable.